So regulatory testing, it's not product testing. It's testing to a set of product standards that certifies your product is, but it certifies it to something, some standard, whether it be a safety standard. Usually it's a safety standard, but there's a myriad of different standards out there that you can test your product to, depending on the market that it is supposed to serve. So some of the products that we work on, they're certified to laboratory standards. Some of them, the medical devices, have a whole medical device directive that the products have to be certified to. But what that allows the product to do is to be sold to whatever that market is, anywhere in the world. And once it's certified, it proves a certain baseline that the product hits, that allows the customer, the end user, to have confidence that it's going to be safe and it's not going to hurt anyone or anything. It's kind of like a base level for the product. I don't know how, I've never had to articulate that before.
Yeah, so the regulatory approvals are part of the overall approval of the product to get it ready for the market. The requirements that the customer might have for the product, that it performs certain functions and meet certain performance. The NRTLs, the nationally recognized test laboratories, they don't even care if it works. They care about the particular standards that in some cases are mandated by law that a product must meet. In others, like Underwriters Laboratories in the United States, they put out a set of standards, and customers simply demand that the product meet those standards. So if you want to sell to those customers, you have to get UL. There's no law in the United States that says you shall have it, but it's the customers that demand it, mostly because they don't want their house to burn down when they plug it into the wall. UL, TUV, Intertek, their test laboratories that will perform the testing, and each of them can pretty much test all of the standards. But it's the standards which dictate the safety features of the product. What is the amount of leakage of current from the mains, into the chassis of the unit? A high potential test to make sure that your insulation is sufficient, that even if you get like a lightning strike on the line, it's not going to damage the instrument and possibly hurt someone who's using it. They also check to make sure that the grounding system is adequate, so that when you've plugged it in and the earth ground is connected at the wall, the chassis and other conductive parts of the enclosure are properly earth grounded, so that if you're touching it, you can't be shocked. And there's some products that plug into the wall need that certification. Others that are portable, they simply need different certifications. In the EU, CE marking is required, and electronic devices have to be tested for electromagnetic interference, conducted emissions if it's plugged into the wall, susceptibility to external electromagnetic emissions. There's a whole raft of tests depending upon the risk of the product that you have to pass.
Yeah, and so to that point too, depending on what the product is and what market it serves, it will be tested to particular standards. So, like, we just had a product that actually went through. John, I guess I would consider NSF. That's a branch, right?
So NSF, National Sanitary Foundation, does have a range of standards, and food service companies insist that equipment that are in their restaurants or places where food is being served, that equipment comply with the NSF standards. So they did a technical evaluation of the product, and they issued a report to product resource, actually to the customer, who handed it over to product resources, which identified the standards that that product needed to meet. And there were general standards like the size of the gaps in the enclosure. There were specific standards like this particular part must be constructed out of a certain approved material. Even the colorant in that part needed to be approved. So, and it depends upon if that part is in contact with the food or is in secondary contact, or the splash zone, I think they called it, and or whether it's just some part in the inside that never touches the food, in which case they usually don't care about it. But wetted parts, the tubing that brings water through the instrument, that needs to be specific, of a specific quality.
But that NSF testing was required for that product because it was a food service product. Whereas another product that we're building right now is tested to IEC 60601, which is for medical devices. So this, I forget if the product is a class 1 or class 2 medical device. I think it's class 2, but it has to be tested to 60601 IEC certification. And basically that's just a different standard of things that need to be verified safe for use in particular environments. In this case, medical environments, i.e. operating rooms, doctor's offices, that kind of place. So depending on what the product is, different standards will apply. And that's something that, engineering and quality, as well as the test labs, will work to decide what standards apply. And that's based off of, what are the markets this product goes into, who's going to be using it, what are their qualifications. There's a whole bunch of input that has to be laid out up front to decide what standards get applied to the product and what standards that product has to meet.
When a customer brings the product to us and says, we want you to build this, and oh, by the way, we need to get regulatory approvals, what approvals does it need? And there's kind of two parts to that question. Which mark do you want to put on the product? Does it need to have the UL mark or the TUV mark or both? Does the FCC need to have their mark on it? There are a whole bunch of them, especially if you're going for worldwide certification. In China, it's CCC, and it's pretty crazy, the number of different standards that you have to meet. So the first question that we ask, of course, is after, hey, what is this thing and what does it do? Because the regulatory standards are specific to the type of equipment and the job that it does, but also for the market that it's going into. Going to go into the EU, CE mark is required. Going to be only in the United States or only in North America? Well, you don't need the CE mark on it. But you probably want to get UL for the US and UL for Canada. So CUL, I think they call it. And so you'll take the product, you'll describe the market, where are you going to sell it, and what does it do? And there'll be a list of standards that the test lab believes you need to meet. And the customer decides exactly which standards it needs to meet. And that's usually described as those are the marks that will go on the product. So if you get the UL mark in the product, there'll be a UL number associated with it. Someone can look up online all of the standards, the UL standards that product meets, to make sure it's suitable for the purposes that they want to use the product. And then, of course, the next step is exactly what tests need to be run on the product in order to demonstrate that it meets those standards. And that's what the engineers need to know. What testing is it going to be? If your product is IP rated, which is an ingress protection rating, it's how tight is the enclosure? Will it withstand dripping water or spraying water? Does it need to, do you need people to keep their fingers out of it? Because it might have high enough voltage electrical parts to be dangerous inside, or does it need to be so tight that it's actually dust tight? And we have designed, built, and had regulatory approval on all kinds of products from IP22 up to IP54. The different ratings, the different tests, it's a different level of engineering that needs to go into the product. So we think it's important that right up front, when you're starting the design, you decide what is the product, where are you going to sell it, identify what standards it needs to have marked on the label, and therefore what tests it needs to pass. And that's going to give you insight as to how to design the product so that it will pass those tests. So I'll say we can come up with a pretty quick preliminary list, but to do it right, we need to talk with an NRTL, because those guys are up to date on all of the standards and regulations. We have a good familiarity with it, but we're not, I don't know what you would call a notified body. When someone passes a law that now requires 2000 volt isolation for some product, we're not on the list to get a letter that says, by the way, now you have to do this. But TUV is. And they'll get that letter and they'll understand what it means, and they'll send it out to all of their field offices and say, hey, now if you want to get this particular mark on this particular type of product, the test standards have changed. There's a new EN something specification that comes out. Please be aware that it's changed. And that way, and in their processes, they're always referring to the current standards.
And that's the other thing. That's the other piece of these regulatory standards is a lot of times, if not all the time, a piece of what will come out of that certification. You know, you've gone through the regulatory testing and now you are approved, you're certified to some standard. Typically what one of the outputs is of that for the product is what they call a listing report. And inclusive of that is a bunch of a critical components list. So the regulatory bodies, as part of their review and certification, they'll look through every single item within your product, and they'll decide based off of a bunch of different criteria, but they'll decide what components are deemed critical in this device, and can't change without further review. So if there's something that is, how can I say it, really important to the functionality or the safety of the product, the regulatory body will deem that a critical component that says we, the manufacturer, have to put in certain checks and balances to ensure that what is on the critical components list is what we are buying, is what we are receiving, is what we are using every time. And again, if that product or if that component goes obsolete, or we need to change it for some design reason, then it needs to be reevaluated for that certification. So what we'll do with a lot of our products, we get this critical components list and we'll maintain that for the product, for the lifetime of the product, and we'll check all of those items again are spec'd right, bought right, received right, and used properly in the design as just another layer of control on that product so that it adheres to that standard.